forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March.
Again, rebounded by Indiana. The game is over.
For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk,
Oh, he just shook the gravity.
and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Deace, joined by my co-host, Aaron McIntire. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing good, man. Just sitting here presiding over the decline and fall of everything. Other than that, it's another great summer here in the Midwest, brother.
Yeah, happy Wednesday. I mean, that's Wednesday now.
Indeed, it is Wednesday now. So this week on Bigger Ten, we're going to begin our Big Five on Bigger Ten is going to have a singular focus. And that is the story that is still developing out of the University of Iowa, because it's by far the biggest story occurring in the Big Ten right now. And depending on how it develops and what goes on down the road, it could have ramifications. It could swing 2 or 3 games in the win column for not just Iowa, but therefore all the teams within the division that would play them as well. It is possible that we could look back at the end of the season and say, hey, this was the biggest preseason story in the Big Ten, or it was just a story that got a lot of news in June because not else was happening, right? We don't know the answer to that.
Right.
So also, we're going to look at this strictly from a football perspective because we don't know what went on there. We know what a group of former players has said went on there, and then another group of former players has said, well, I don't know, we really enjoyed our experience at Iowa and didn't think that there were any racial tensions or issues within the program. The university, as we speak, is still investigating these matters. So there's really no point in rendering a verdict on our thoughts on what's being alleged or being discussed because we don't know. So we're going to strictly look at this, though, from a football perspective. And given that this is your favorite team, and of course, you've got a keen eye on this story all along, it's right in your wheelhouse as well. So to me, I think there are 5 subplots to this story from a football perspective, Aaron. I'm going to set each of them up here in the Big Five on Bigger Ten, and then let you respond to each of them as an Iowa fan and give your take. Okay.
Gotcha.
So let's start with the first one, and that is the end of the era of Chris Doyle, arguably the most celebrated strength and conditioning coach in college football in the last couple of decades, the highest paid strength and conditioning coach in college football, really is every bit as key to the success Kirk Ferentz has had at Iowa as anybody other than Kirk himself has been. He's been there since year 2 and the entire rest of the time, even though there is some disturbing allegations, I guess we'll say, about his behavior, his methods, the results are inarguable. I mean, if you look at what Iowa has done with so many, quote unquote, developmental, see that as low-ranked recruits, that it has turned into absolute hulks, monsters, future millionaires in the NFL. And right now, when you're in an off season where you didn't have your strength and conditioning all off season long because of the pandemic and the lockdowns, you're now bringing players back in an effort in June to spend about 6 weeks getting them ready for a longer 6-week fall camp to begin in mid-July. And this is the most important factor in the development of the Iowa program. I mean, the strength and conditioning program is one of the vital foundations of any college football program, but it's uniquely important because of the way that Iowa has to recruit and then develop players over a 3 to 5 year period. What's the impact of his departure? Can the assistant who's running it now just, hey, we know it, we're going to do all the same methods, just maybe a little bit kinder and gentler and a little bit more progressive, and we won't skip a beat? Are we really going to sit here and say that losing the highest rated strength and conditioning coach and on the eve of camp beginning won't have any impact on the season at all? I don't know. I'm asking.
There are already, for every single team in college football, Steve, there was already going to be question marks about how in shape people were going to be. And maybe from my perspective, maybe it's not quite as big of a deal as I'm making it out to be. But when you're away from a football program, for months and months on end, as every single player was across the country because of the lockdowns, there were already going to be question marks about how in shape these players were going to be. So that's just something that was baked into the cake this season already for basically every single team in the landscape of college football. As far as losing Chris Doyle specifically, yeah. I mean, you can't understate how big of an impact this guy has had on the culture of Iowa athletics. Maximum accountability is something that I've heard from former players for as long as I can remember. And that seems to be where some of these allegations are going from, maybe too much accountability to just the obfuscation, easy for me to say, of many different types of allegations. And again, we're going to put those aside for right now. But Chris Doyle, the man, the coach, what have you, he has had as big of an impact as anything on this program because a lot of people, I don't think, understand he has all of the access to these players during the parts of the year when the rest of the coaching staff can't, by NCAA rules, actually work with these players. So by default, he's the guy who's basically running these young men's lives while they are not actually in the midst of the football season. Now, Raymond Braithwaite, I believe that's the name of the guy who took over for Chris Doyle. Well, he's been, a Doyle acolyte now for years and years as well. So I'm not sure.
Which means let's assume that every allegation is true for just a second, for the sake of this, from a football perspective. That means he would have been there side by side, right? Arm in arm with Chris Doyle while these, Gran Torino-esque tactics were used the entire time. He doesn't walk into the situation with any of that taint on him as well. That's the part about this also from a football perspective I don't understand. I mean, I'm sure Mr. Would you say his name was Braithwaite? Braithwaite. Yeah. I'm sure he has some of his own thoughts and methods and things of that nature. But, if this was going on in the football program as it's being alleged all these years, at least as long as he's been there, as the assistant, as the guy right under Chris Doyle, then, I mean, he was essentially implementing these things, right?
Yeah, and by extension, Kirk Ferentz as well. I mean, that's where this gets into the complete murkiness, which I know we were just going to go to stick to a football perspective here, but this brings us into, I think, a larger picture here. Yeah, I don't think there's any debate as far as between you and I about there's a difference between a blanket culture of negative feedback, even borderline bullying, crossing a line. Young men, and I'll say this, I never have even been anywhere in the conversation of a D1 elite college athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but it don't have to be because all young men, especially that age, they need to have feedback. Some of that feedback needs to be negative to challenge you because you're in a pressure cooker. This is preparing you for life. This is preparing you for the football field as well. So there's always going to be negative, but a blanket culture of negative feedback also has the capability of crushing young men as well, where it's just you get to a point where you just give up. You know what? This is not worth it to me. I'm never going to be able to succeed. And it sounds like maybe that's where it was. There's a vast chasm between what I just described and racial allegations as well. And where Raymond Braithwaite fits in here, I'm not quite sure. It seems to be that he's well respected from the players on the team already.
We thought Chris Doyle was well respected until a week ago.
Chris Doyle was well respected as well. So who knows? Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you ask me.
All right, let's get to point 2 that I think needs to be discussed from a football perspective. Are we going to have a dialogue here or a distraction? So Coach Ferentz had a press conference a few days ago with some players pointing out, hey, we're looking at making some evolution, some changes, etc. But even without this story, this is leading to a sea change in the culture of the Iowa football program. Players given free rein on social media, for example, before they were not, which means even if they're not saying anything, in their feed is going to be constant commentary about this sort of thing all of the time. And can you set this aside? I mean, it is hard to compartmentalize. I'm going to be 47 years old here in a month. Okay. It is hard to compartmentalize. I'll just give a brutally honest example. So wife and I have an argument before an hour before I have to go on the air and do our daily show for the Blaze earlier this week, right? Okay. I'm married. We have arguments. It happens. I, though, have to compartmentalize that, get that out of my head, because I still have to sit here and perform, right? I got to do a job that hundreds of thousands of people are going to watch, download, listen to, right? I've got employees and they depend on, me not screwing up and dropping an F-bomb or doing something that gets us all fired, because your livelihoods, your livelihoods depend on mine, right? That is just a microcosm of what I mean by what I'm talking about this point. The level of focus it takes, the margin for error here, and we're going to talk more margin for error a little bit later on, but just even on an individual level, for you to be successful, if you're in a developmental program, often the same methods are available to every 2- and 3-star recruit Iowa brings in to develop, right? Mm-hmm. You, though, have to have the mental toughness and commitment to take advantage of that, to then use those resources to turn yourself into a guy that looks like a 4- and 5-star recruit when you leave, right? Can you do that with the distraction of this going on constantly? As we speak, the probe is still continuing within the program, right? There's still all kinds of media coverage, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on as well. But can the players on an individual level compartmentalize at really a unique level than is mostly asked of you between the ages of 19 and 22?
So I think we need to stipulate to something. These are not kids. They're young men.
Right.
Having said that, they're still young men. Mm-hmm. And so there's still learning and there's still maturing that needs to do. And I think in the case of like Chuba Hubbard earlier this week, the Oklahoma State Heisman candidate who went out and dragged his coach on Twitter.
Right.
Best case scenario, maximum benefit of the doubt that I can give him is that was just simply an immature thing. Well, it was an immature thing, but that was just as innocent as I can make that out.
He even said it was immature afterwards, so I should have gone directly to my coach first.
Exactly. Yeah. So there are still maturing processes that need to happen here within a football program. Having said that, you're a hell of a lot different as an 18-year-old freshman stepping onto campus, stepping into that shockwave of a culture change, or at least what it used to be at Iowa anyway, than you are in year 4, and you kind of know what the drill, you know the expectations, and you know the penalties for screwing up as well. So my question then becomes, and I think the answer to this question is, who is the alpha player on this team?
Yeah, the internal leadership will be key.
Alpha in the locker room. And I really don't know who that is right now. I mean, Iowa throughout the years, some have been stronger and more vocal than others. But Iowa throughout the years, for all of the, let's say, lacking at the recruiting talent that they've had and the development that they've had to do, they have always had seemingly strong leaders within that locker room who are able to band together the team and focus on the task at hand here. Whereas, it's one thing to have a distracted locker room at Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, because your talent is just that
still
good.
better than 99% of the teams you're going to play.
You can't have that at Iowa. Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit later, so I'll kind of focus on who is the alpha dog here?
That's a great point.
Who is going to be able to keep guys focused? And I just don't know who that is.
Let me throw an example that I think is very plausible to illustrate the point that we're discussing right here, Aaron. So we're in an election year, right? Okay. What if some player is on Twitter and one of his teammates' dads tweets out, I mean, look what happened with Mike Gundy and OAN. Yep. Okay. For those of you that know what OAN is, I've never even watched it. Right. I work in conservative media. I've never even watched it. Okay. But it's basically a Trump slappy television network. That's what it is. Right. Okay. And so Mike Gundy wears a t-shirt. We don't even really know the context. Could have been a troll. Who knows? Okay. I don't even know how you would acquire an OAN t-shirt, by the way.
Yeah.
All right. But he's wearing one and it becomes a national story for 2 days in this environment. Right. And all kinds of national sports media figures are saying, hey, that's tone deaf. Again, so are we having a dialogue or not? Yeah, so no one else can have another opinion? Well, let's say a teammate's father is on Twitter and starts dropping Trump 2020 bombs, or has something critical of some leader, about what some leader at Black Lives Matter believes on another issue or topic. Are we going to have a dialogue or are we going to have a distraction? You know what I'm saying? I think folks, and this isn't just true of Iowa. I think every program needs to be prepared for stuff like this.
Yeah. And so far, I think we know what the answer to that question is. So far, I think we do. And maybe that will change. Maybe that will change when we get into the heat of the season and we're actually talking about W&Ls and Jimmies and Joes and X's and O's. Maybe that will change. But man, and we'll talk about this later, the appetite of many, and I would say even most in the media, to make big deals and make distractions instead of dialogues out of this is
which makes it insatiable. Even if the players do want to stick together, the external forces at work make it difficult. Yeah. All right, let's get to the next point here as we look at the football fallout from what's going on at the University of Iowa. The evolution of coaches. And I said this on our Twitter account. You know, I haven't talked to Kirk Ferentz meaningfully in 10 years, okay? But I've known him for 20 years. I used to know him really well. I got pictures hanging up in my maize and blue man cave of my children with Kirk Ferentz. If he's a racist, man, he did a hell of a job hiding it for the last 20 years. That notwithstanding, though, would he be the first guy who learned that you either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Would he be the first guy who got a little bit older and went from get off my lawn to Gran Torino? I made that reference earlier. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Where suddenly, you know, stuff that, you know, I love the word sucks. In my generation and your generation, it has doesn't really have a profane undertone to it, right? Right. But man, I got to tell you, I hear from our grandparents who I might as well just be dropping F-bombs on the air when I say that word because they come from another era, right? Where that was in polite conversation to them, you know? Could I foresee a scenario where a coach who's been there since we were all still using dial-up modems and you don't even remember what those were? All right. So could I see a coach that still thinks, you know, guys can't wear dreads and hoodies and have a tattoo and be on could I see a situation where a guy's been there for so long he doesn't want to evolve? Well, that happens all day and every day. That's every day that ends in Y, right? Okay. Right. And I do think that even if you want to take the most pro empathy or benefit of the doubt approach here, I do think coaches have to realize, you know, I look at what happened at Michigan with our coach and Jim Harbaugh. He went to a police brutality march in Ann Arbor with his players. A month ago, he was on a National Review podcast talking about the virus and why he was pro-life, right? I think that coaches in this era have to realize they're in an era of player empowerment now. And for the most part, at Bigger Ten, we've been very pro-player empowerment because we think the players are putting in a lot more effort than just the value of an education when you look at the money they're worth now compared to the 70s and the 80s. But coaches better be prepared for that too. They better be prepared to discuss social issues and things of the like with players. If we're gonna give them access now to the broader world out there, and hey, you're grown men, you can have an opinion, you better be prepared to navigate that rather than just, you know, party like it's 1999, which is the year Kirk Ferentz arrived, or the second year after Kirk, or the first year Kirk Ferentz arrived here. And I think at the very least, coaches around the country better realize that the reality is some of the rules of engagement have changed. You have to evolve. That's true in any generation. That doesn't mean you give up all of your timeless values, but you have to ask yourself, is this a timeless value or a preference of mine because of the generation I'm from, right? Do I not want a kid wearing a hoodie or growing dreadlocks because I thought it meant something in 1988 that nowadays no one freaking cares about any of that? I think those are questions I think coaches, particularly ones that are old school like a Kirk Ferentz, better be asking themselves. Otherwise, in this environment, they risk blowing up their programs if they don't. Yeah, and just from a human nature perspective as well, when you've been there for 15 years, that obviously means in college football that you've had success, which means you have more power and control of your program and less pressure to actually do things the way the AD or the way other people who might otherwise be in positions of power over you at other universities, you can do them your way. And so from just a human nature perspective, you're Captain freaking Kirk in Fort Kinnick and your word is law. And so it's hard to change that and hard to be willing to see that. So yeah, I can see the Gran Torino get off my lawn type of thing kicking into effect as well. Part of this though, it's kind of difficult to delineate. And
I think this happens to varying degrees at a lot of programs, and maybe just because I'm so close, I'm biased to Iowa, that I think it's carried out to the nth degree at Iowa. But it's this culture. It's a very military-like culture, according to some of the players who have been there in the past. Washed Up Walk-Ons, which is a podcast created by former Iowa players. They had a podcast talking about the culture of Iowa, and it is very militaristic. And when you talk to anybody who's been in the military about basic training, the reason why you get yelled at gratuitously and the reason why they are so specific with their requirements to a gratuitous degree, the reason why they do that is because they're breaking you down. They're breaking the individual down to be a part of the broader team. And it sounds like that's what Iowa tries to do as well. There's no individual. The ego is, it's submerged, I think is the word that I've heard used as well. And so that's the difficult part of this as well. Because essentially, I think people who have been around this program for a long time, Kirk Ferentz, of course, being the guy who created the current culture at Iowa, they see they hear what you have to say. If they would say, well, there goes our culture.
Right.
There goes our culture. But you're right. We are living in an age of player empowerment. And so of guys being able to have a voice. And here's the other tentacle of this. When NIL comes down, name, image, and likeness legislation,
the idea that you're going to suppress this individuality is just not realistic.
Because you're going to be at every single disadvantage. When you come and you tell players, hey, come to Iowa, you're going to have to work really hard, break yourself down. And by the way, you're not going to be able to make money off of your name, image, and likeness, because how are most players going to do that? If they have big followings on social media, that's going to be a primary way to do that.
That's a great point, Aaron.
So that's another tentacle to this as well. So I don't know. I don't have the answer. If you're Kirk Ferentz, if you're the Iowa program, I don't have the answer of how you maintain that environment other than really strong player leadership. And that's something that you just cannot buy and you just can't force into existence. That's just something that you gotta really hope and help develop.
When we went through the integration period in sports, there were two reasons coaches didn't want to integrate. One, they were racists. Right? That was one reason. They were racists, but there really weren't as many Adolf Rupps, I think, as maybe people believe. But there were definitely flat out racists that didn't want to integrate. The other reason, which I think is the majority of the coaches, is they didn't think they could manage integrating the cultural differences, the racial tensions. They couldn't remember the Titans. They just didn't think, they didn't grow up in an era of that level of diversity and integration. You know what I'm saying? And they just, how do I manage this? How do I put this together? And they weren't comfortable with it. Well, whether that was because they were racist or they weren't comfortable with the way society had changed, it was irrelevant, because the coaches that were comfortable with it, that could handle the evolution, they had more talent and better players, and they kicked your ass. Right? And the story goes that the way Bear Bryant got Alabama to finally agree to integrate the Crimson Tide football program is he scheduled a home game with USC. And the game was on national television. And I want to say it was Sam Bam Cunningham, USC's All-American running back, came in on ABC. Keith Jackson did the game, and he ran over, around, and through Alabama that day. I mean, it was the JV versus the varsity. Sure. Freaking crushed them. And the story is that Bear Bryant knew that in order to finally get Bubba the Love Sponge down south there to go along with the new era, they were going to have to be humbled and realized, okay, hey, you can still be as racist as you want, but do you guys want the Crimson Tide to roll? Because if you do, we got to get the best players. And right now you're telling me a large segment of the best players we can't recruit for no other reason other than the color in their skin. So we'll go play a school that doesn't have a problem with that. And John McKay will bring USC in here and he'll kick our ass for 3.5 hours on national television. Then tell me if you still want to, roll old school, right? I mean, and I don't think we're at the point that we were at as a society in 1972. Obviously, I would hope we've made some progress since then, but at the very least, I do think that there are certain things that as we get older, we don't want to evolve and change. And that's just the human condition. Right. And I think all coaches have to recognize we're heading into a new era. And even if we didn't have the racial unrest we have right now, what you said about the NIL is going to change the game anyway. The idea that you're going to suppress all these individual egos now in the ways that you were able to do in a college culture before, you're just not going to be permitted that. Somebody on your team, if you're any good, is going to be valuable. Somebody will be. Somebody, if you're any good, is going to be worthy of having their brand singled out above everybody else. That's unavoidable now. Yep. And so you better be prepared to evolve, whether it's because of racial unrest or just because the level of individual acclaim that's going to these players in the era to come is going to increase, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, the fourth factor to take a look at, the way Iowa wins football games. And, we have joked about this for years, that you pretty much know every week that 75% of Iowa's games are 24-21, 21-17, 17-14, right? This is an Iowa fan. Yep. You watch all these games.
Yep.
That a lot of the way that they frame a game to win is taking advantage of your mistakes, more discipline, knowing their identity. It's a big identity program. We know who we are every single year, right? Well, if there's even just a little unrest, a little distraction, just anything at all that takes away from the normal culture that Iowa on a lot of college football Saturdays is able to impose itself on its opponent. It doesn't take much, Aaron, for that 21-17,
yep.
24-21, 17-14 score, right? It doesn't take too much when that's your margin for error most weeks as an Iowa football program. It doesn't take much to flip that score and have it go the other way against you.
Yeah, so here's the thing. The as far as from the win-loss perspective from the season, the ceiling hasn't changed, I don't think, for this Iowa team. I didn't think it was that high to begin with, but it really hasn't changed. The floor, Lord have mercy. I don't want to know what the floor looks like. I really do believe that the floor for this Iowa team could be very, very, very bleak.
I mean, let's play it another. Go ahead.
Let me flesh that out a little bit more. When you have these types of issues that threaten a locker room unity, and it from all intents and purposes, it sounds like they're doing well right now. They hashed things out. But what if things change before the season or during the season? You get off to a hot start, 3 or 4 wins in a row, what have you. And then maybe you have a heartbreaking loss, and you got to go back to that locker room that may be divided, or you're pissed off at that guy, or that guy said something the other day. This could be like a Wisconsin. You remember Wisconsin a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
When they were ranked in the top 5
in the preseason and finished 7-5. Yeah.
The rumor going around, and I don't know if this was ever confirmed, is that members of the offensive linemen were sampling the goods of one of the quarterbacks. If you get my drift,
yep.
That just killed their team.
Yeah,
that just killed their team. That's not even at a racial level either. And so I think if there are any chinks in the armor of that locker room, especially with the schedule that they have, this could go from being an 8-4 team at the very best to something I don't even want to contemplate right now very, very quickly, because that's the margin of error, as you just pointed out, that Iowa always has to deal with. That's not including the issues that we've been talking about so far on this podcast. And so I do believe the floor has gotten substantially lower for Iowa. Doesn't mean I think that that's where this is going, but I do think it's gotten substantially lower.
Well, what I was going to play out is the scenario you went to one angle. Let's flip the script. Let's get off to a slow start.
Yeah.
You got Iowa State coming in with a guy that people are saying might be a first-round draft pick at quarterback, right? And this is like the one thing other than win the Big 12 Matt Campbell has not accomplished at Iowa State is beat Iowa, right? Mm-hmm. So they come in here with their hair on fire, win an early game at Kinnick when it's 1/3 or 1/2 full because of social distancing, right? Okay. Right. And then Iowa plays, except for maybe Michigan State, I think the toughest Big Ten schedule in the conference this year. And you lose a game early there, and that's your second loss.
No, that's
how hard does it get to hold the thing together? Does that open the door for some of this to seep in? I think these are questions that as we look at if we need to contemplate now, because if we see a season from Iowa we're not used to seeing under Kirk Ferentz, we can look back and say the unique circumstances that preceded this season kind of set up the dynamic for something like that to happen, right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. It's just it's very tedious right now. I think that's pretty easy to see. Now, who knows? They could come out with their heads on.
It could go the other way too,
with their hair on fire.
Yeah,
as
us
well.
against the world. F you all, man. And
Yep.
now that could, we should throw that on the table too, because that's possible as well, right?
Yep.
That they come out and this is a galvanizing thing, and they get together as a team and they're like, you know what, man, we got the whole rest of our lives to argue with each other about politics and hate each other. Right now, we got 12 weeks to go out there and make everybody pay for doubting us, right?
Yeah.
I could see that too, right? That's a possibility.
That's what you have to be hoping for if you're an Iowa fan, I think.
The final thing, though, and I think this might be the most difficult challenge for the scenario that you and I just played out, where they're just like us against the world. Let's send a message, right? For that to happen, though, the problem with doing that is today's media environment.
Yep.
Today's media environment is to incentivize these divisions.
Yep.
It's to amplify them. Now, we can have, this is not the program to debate whether that is a good or bad thing. I'm not here to give you my position on that. But it is what it is. There's no point pretending that's not the case, right? Okay? We all know that is the case. So let's all be adults about it and acknowledge it. Let's not lie to each other. We know this. Okay. And so we can have different opinions on whether we think that's warranted or responsible or not. But to deny that is the case would be, frankly, to pee on each other and say that it's raining. So despite whatever our opinions may be on that situation, let's be honest about the fact that is what the situation is. Will the media even let them move on if they want to? For example, an early loss to Iowa State. Will the narrative be, is there division in the Iowa locker room? This is the first time they've ever lost to the Cyclones. Is it because it went on this offseason? Can they ever get away from this? And even the local media that has really been all over this story. But I mean, look at the amount of national coverage that Chuba Hubbard's story got a couple of days ago.
Within a matter of minutes, really.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, are we going to see Bruce Feldman, Pat Forty, the entire college football, intelligentsia jump on this as well? Even if the players had that esprit de corps, does the media environment we live in today even permit you to move on from something like this as a team? I think that is another question to discuss.
I might have given, from a local media perspective, I might have given the benefit of the doubt to saying yes, and that we'll circle the wagons because the local media is all Iowa fans anyway. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's just be honest about that. They're all Iowa fans. There was something that was published on a really popular Hawkeye website. It was another allegation where a former player, and this player's name is Darrell Johnson-Koulianos, didn't just insinuate. He said that Kirk Ferentz orchestrated a drug bust on his house while he was a member of the Iowa football team. That got published on the leading Iowa football and Iowa athletics, fan site. I think that's your answer right there. So the same instinct that for whatever reason there was a flaming racist marauding around the halls of the Iowa complex for 20 years, and these writers said nothing about it or knew nothing about it. To say I see something or I see nothing, I know nothing. That same instinct is now going to go 180 degrees the other direction and try to glom onto anything they can in order to, I don't know, is there division? Is this racist? Is that racist? That's what's going to happen. I at least that's what I've seen so far, and I'm very, very cynical. I mean, you work with me for 3-4 hours a day every single day, so you know that.
Yep.
But I think that was your indication right there. We were told by multiple people, one in particular, that we're supposed to just believe all of these allegations no matter what, and we aren't owed an explanation. That very same writer then turned around and published that from Darrell Johnson-Koulianos, which is in unanimity just decried as just complete and total BS. Of course it is. It is on its face. That sounds ridiculous because I believe one of Ferentz's own children has been arrested by Iowa City police before. So all that is to say, there is an appetite amongst the media to try to blow this up. And there are so many different tentacles from that and implications from that should probably be for another show. But I think at least from the local media perspective, and once it starts in the local media, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the big guys will pick it up as well and run with it as much as they want to. Once it starts circulating, once anything starts circulating in the local Hawkeye media, it's going to get picked up. So I think this is, again, I'm going to go back to where I started with all of this, or near the beginning. This has everything to do with the leadership in that locker room. Is it healthy right now? Are they growing together? If so, then this could be a really galvanizing moment for the team.
Sure.
As you talked about before. If not, good grief, the media is going to pick this team apart.
I think the moral of all of this is, if you're a college football coach, you have to realize, the environment that you are in. And you can't control that environment. You cannot. The environment is bigger than you. And there's pluses and minuses to it, right? I'm all for giving the players a voice. I'm uncomfortable, though, with this notion, though, that they get to have any opinion they want. And if you disagree, then somehow you're terrible. Well, that's not the way the world works. People have to learn to work together that have vastly different opinions. Some of them you think are nuts and crazy all of the time, right? But the reality is that is the environment you are in. You have to recognize that as a coach. You better be taking inventory of where you are at with relating to your players, understanding what motivates them, what their beliefs are, not just assuming conformity, but that you have a real relationship with them. I think the moral to this story is you better recognize the times in which you work. They are a-changing.
Yep.
That is the reality, period. We'll come back and we will play our weekly game of Would You Rather next.
Bigger 10 is brought to you by Michigan Podcast. If you like what you're hearing today and would like to support us, head on over to Patreon, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast, where if you live somewhere where sports wagering is illegal, you can find Steve's picks for various games for just $5 a month. In the process, you can say thank you for creating this podcast on YouTube or via podcast, wherever you listen. Patreon.com/Michigan Podcast.
All right, here we go. This week's weekly game of Bigger 10 Would You Rather. Aaron, you ready to go?
You bet.
All right, this one is for you. Would you rather be the new strength and conditioning coach at Iowa, trying to replace a legend and implement a program on the fly after a long no-contact season, or the new quarterback at Iowa taking over with no spring ball and facing such a tough schedule? Which of those two would you rather be?
I think I would be the strength and conditioning coach. One, this Raymond Braithwaite, he's been in the program before, so there's got to be some rapport with these athletes as well. I think it's a little bit easier to build muscle, even if it is, within a truncated schedule.
Then timing?
Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah.
So I would much rather be Raymond Braithwaite than Spencer Petras at this point.
All right, that's a good point.
Let's see, this one's for you, Aaron. Would you rather be Mike Gundy or Kirk Ferentz right now?
Gosh. I'd rather be Kirk Ferentz right now. And the reason being is, how do I put this? I don't believe Mike Gundy's apology at all. I don't. It really seemed like the kind of video they make in basements in Pyongyang. Okay? And
we were waiting for SEAL Team 6 to bust in and break them out.
I mean, I in fact, we should go back and watch that video and see if the blinks are Morse code.
Yeah.
Okay? Is there a message there? Because what happened, you heard about what happened at Florida State, right? New coach,
Yep.
Mike Norvell, and said that he had spoken to all his players about their concerns and the racial unrest, and his star player, Marvin Austin, who could have been a first-round pick in this year's NFL draft and came back for his senior year, came out and said, Coach ain't talked to anybody. I don't know what the hell Coach is talking about. See, coaches used to get away. That's what I was talking about a few minutes ago. This is a different environment. You better be more directly involved with your players and be on the up and up than ever before. If I was a player, all right, now I happen to think the whole controversy about wearing a t-shirt on some slappy network is dumb on its face. But if my players are concerned about that, and if I feel like I have to really address it, I better address it though sincerely. You know what I'm saying? I better be sincere about it. as opposed to let me put out a couple of videos in a day and try to squash this. And at the very least, I'll say this about Kirk Ferentz. I think his attempt to address whatever the issues are, because we really still don't know what they are.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But there's far more authenticity in that I've seen in him than what I saw from Mike Gundy the last 24 hours. And so I think there's a better chance that Kirk Ferentz could get a reboot or a second wind out of this than Mike Gundy could.
Sure.
Right?
Yep. That was going to be the variation of what I said if I was asked that too.
All right. So this next one is for you. I believe that's actually mine that you were going to ask me.
Oh, my bad.
That's all right. We can go ahead. We'll skip ahead.
I skipped ahead. There we go.
All right. Would you rather attend Big Ten Media Days in person, or this year it will be virtual? What would you rather do?
Well, I know I hear Iowa media complaining about it because it seems to be less and less important every single year, and it keeps getting moved up, sooner and sooner every single year as well. And they don't like driving that long drive to Chicago and back. I hear complaints about that all the time. Guys, I'm not in the Iowa media, so personally, I would love to go attend Big Ten Media Days in person and be able to potentially talk to all the coaches and a few of the players as well. I loved it when I used to go every year. I mean, it gets you back in the football mindset and gets you excited for the most wonderful time of the year. So I would much rather go in person than virtually, but I'm guessing this might actually be the way things are from now on, just a virtual, Big Ten Media Day, but who knows? I missed it, man. I getting to just hang out and talk. And when I went every year, they were still doing media guides. So coming home with all of the media guides for all the teams. Oh, nice. Hanging out with Barry Alvarez. I remember one day just sitting down with Joe Paterno for an hour while he was just, taking down Perrier water, like it was crack. I've got a ton of good memories. One of my favorite memories from Big Ten Media Days is the first year that I went. I go to Lloyd Carr's table when he's coaching at Michigan, and I've not told him I'm a Michigan fan. I'm a sports talk show host from Iowa, and I didn't really know the layout that these were like mini press conferences. I thought I could get individual interviews with all these guys, take back for my show, right? Mm-hmm. So I go and wait my turn. Everybody's done asking questions, and I step in, and I've got like 4 or 5 questions, like a 5-minute interview I'm going to do with Lloyd Carr to go back and play on my show. I ask a couple of questions, and Lloyd kind of does that thing where he looks away like, okay, you had your turn, now it's somebody else's. And you know me, dude. And you know me at 46. Imagine what I was like at 26 when this happened. Okay? Not done yet. Yeah, I'm not done yet. I'm just going to keep going. I'm done when I'm done. You know what I'm saying? I waited everybody else's turn. Now it's mine. And he could not. Lloyd Carr was so rude to me. But I don't really care. I just wanted to get my audio. So afterwards, after the media session, they have the banquet, and then the fans can meet that come to the media days back then, could meet the players and coaches and get autographs and pictures, right? During the fan section, I go over to get my picture taken with Lloyd Carr. And he looks me up and down and he says, hey, wait a minute. Weren't you the guy that was just kept asking me question after question after question a little while ago? I said, yeah, coach, turns out I'm a huge Michigan fan. I'm just from Iowa. And he looks at me and he says, why didn't you just tell me you were a Michigan fan from the outset? I'd been a hell of a lot nicer to you. Some good self-awareness there. Yes, yeah. Very nice. Yeah, but I loved going back in the day. It was a ton of fun. Very nice. This last one is for you. Would you rather have a divided locker room and everybody's in shape, or a united locker room where nobody's worked out for the past 3 months? Because they're still young and there's at least some baseline. Yeah, like at my age, if I didn't work out for 3 months, I'd be well over 3 bills in no time. Okay. At their age, there's enough residual metabolism and physiological advantages that they're not completely starting from a blank slate. You know what I'm saying? Yep. Because they still had winter conditioning. Remember that? They still had January and February winter conditioning before everything got shut down during spring ball. I'd much rather have the unified locker room then, because the chemistry and everything else that goes along with that really just can't be contrived. And when you're dealing with a sport where it's 11 guys in your uniform on both sides of the ball, and if even 1 or 2 of them are not buying in, that's the game. Mm-hmm. You lose the game. And so I'd rather have the unified locker room, knowing that I can eventually get young men physically up to speed given where they're at in life. I'd rather go that route. Right. When we come back, it's our Twitter poll and question of the week to wrap it up next. Bigger Ten is also brought to you by Wolverine Digest from Sports Illustrated. You can find that at wolverinedigest.com. For all of you Michigan fans, you can find a daily rundown of all the hottest topics from basketball and football to recruiting and much, much more. That's wolverinedigest.com, a part of Sports Illustrated.
This week's Twitter poll results. How do you think the controversy at Iowa will impact the Hawkeyes' upcoming football season? 64% said they believe this is going to rally the team. 22% says it will have no real impact. Only 14%, Aaron, thinks it has the potential to divide the team. Now, I don't know what that percentage really is. I just have to believe it's higher than 14%, though. Okay? It has to be, given the environment we're in.
No real impact, guys. It's already had an impact in a season where they already lost most of their spring practices. They already lost like 2 or 3 days of workouts from their voluntary workouts last week when they met up for the first time. So it's already having an impact. I have to believe that the 64% of people who think this will rally the team, I mean, that is very, very optimistic thinking. And I could be wrong. It might. I'm not saying that it won't rally the team. I'm just saying that that's the optimistic option there. That's a very, very optimistic option.
This week's question of the week comes from Gabe Hoyer, who says, if the Ohio State-Penn State game gets moved to Fox for their big noon game, would that mean no whiteout? No, they would still have it as their whiteout. But I don't think there's any chance of that happening. And the reason why is last year, the Michigan-Penn State game fell on the weekend the way that it works, the TV contract, Fox and ESPN alternate weekends when one of them has the first choice of Big Ten games. The Michigan-Penn State game was slated to be Penn State. Penn State has it set up that every other year it's either Michigan or Ohio State as their whiteout. Okay. Well, the weekend of the Michigan-Penn State game last season was the weekend that ESPN had, or Fox had the choice of the game. And in deference to Penn State, because Fox is the primary corporate partner of the Big Ten, right? In deference to Penn State, Fox passed on the Michigan-Penn State game so they could have the game at night as a whiteout. So I don't think there's any chance. I don't know that it's been, because they've delayed the television decisions until later this month. So we don't know yet which weekends Fox has first dibs and which weekend ESPN does. But if it turns out that that I think it's October 24th is when Penn State hosts Ohio State, if that is a Fox weekend, I'd be shocked if they didn't defer to Penn State again and allow that game to be played at night for the whiteout. So
I can't imagine. I mean, has a whiteout ever been played in the daytime?
Michigan played the whiteout game against Penn State in the daytime, Harbaugh's first year in 2015. And that's the only time they've gone to Happy Valley and went on the road since Harbaugh's been the coach.
Really?
And so I wonder if that's why there's no more whiteouts in the daytime. Penn State was like, that didn't work out too well. We're going to play these at night from now on.
Seems weird to think about a whiteout in the day.
Indeed it does. Hey, good show. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. We tried to look at what is a very controversial and complicated issue as holistically as possible while keeping it to football as much as we possibly can. We'll be back at it again next week here on Bigger Ten. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Bigger Ten to keep updated on what we think all week long. Until next time, we'll see you on Bigger Ten.